The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome back to Leicestershire again, everybody, and again we're in the district of Melton today. Now, Melton is an interesting district when it comes to how its parishes are organised. You tend to find more often than not that there are parishes that contain more than one village most of the time, and this is definitely one of those. There are 3 villages within this particular parish. The main one is the one I'm standing in right now. This is Gaddesby. Gaddesby, Gaddis Farm. Alright, let's continue with Melton today, and we come to a parish which has 3 villages within its boundaries next. This is Gaddesby, which has the village of the same name, and 2 smaller ones called Barsby and Ashby Folville. They're all very different places, so this one has a lot to talk about by default. Lovely stuff. Gaddesby is located around 5.5 miles southwest of Melton Mowbray and 8 miles northeast of Leicester. It has a population of 450 who live in 170 households, so this isn't a small village. Gaddesby's name is derived from Old Norse, and that indicates it was a settlement during the Danish occupation of England between the 9th and 11th centuries. Gaddesby grew thanks to the wool industry, a massive economic driver in eastern Leicestershire. Indeed, it had a weekly market and an annual fair from the 14th century onwards. As the wool industry declined and the western half of the county rose in prominence during the Industrial Revolution, Gaddesby settled back into being a rural backwater. Recent housing developments have made Gaddesby a popular rural dormitory for Leicester. Ashby Folville is an estate village that was associated with the Folville family. They were a French lot, and that name is attached to several other villages around Leicestershire, such as Newton Folville. And as for Barsby, that means barn farm. Now, if you have the surname Barsby, you'll likely be a direct descendant of someone who lived in the hamlet. See, I told you it's a varied one, this. Let's go for not just 1, not 2, but 3 walks in this rural slice of Leicestershire. We start our journey around Gaddesby Parish with the main village. These here are the entrance gates to Gaddesby Hall, arguably the most important building the village possesses. Gaddesby Hall was built on the site of an earlier house called Pask Hall, which was surrounded by a moat and dated back to 1390. The old hall was pulled down in 1744 and the present hall erected in its place. The houses in the village formed part of the Gaddesby Hall estate. Over the years, the hall had several owners, including the Nedham, Eyre and Cheney families, all of whom are commemorated in the church. The estate was put up for sale in 1917, at which time a celebrated statue was moved away from the hall. The near life-size marble sculpture depicts a dying horse and a rider on a marble chest. It was created by Joseph Gott in memory of Colonel Edward Hawkins Cheney of the Scots Greys. Now, if the church is open, and we'll find out if it is in a minute, we'll see it in the chancel. Here's the church, and we didn't have to go far to find it. It's literally right next to the hall. The size of the church attests to the importance of the village during the period of its development. Grade 1 listed and dedicated to St Luke, this was originally built as a Norman chapel, a single space without a tower. It was part of the Soak of Rothley from the 10th century. The north and south aisles, the tower and the chancel were added in the 13th century and elaborated over the next 200 years. The church is reputed to have some of the finest examples of 14th century stonework in the country, which adorn its southwest corner on the outside of the Knights Templars Chapel. The oak pews in the nave are probably 15th century, and the limestone font dates from 1320. St Luke's has a peal of 8 bells, the earliest of which is dated 1562. That sculpture of a dying horse and rider in the chancel dates from 1848. On the religious theme, Canon Peter Spink, who died in 2010, was born in Gadsby. He was Canon of Coventry Cathedral, a mystic, spiritual teacher, a writer, and the founder of the Omega Order, which is a mixed teaching and contemplative community. Well, of all the churches I'm going to today, this is the one that I was hoping was going to be open, and my luck is in because it is open. Let's open this outer door. And as you can see, there you go, the church is open. So let's go and find that statue, shall we? Shouldn't be too hard to spot. Apparently it's in the chancel. So let's head for the chancel straight away. And there it is. I can see it straight away. To the back of the church here. There it is. What a fantastic piece of sculpture this is. Absolutely fantastic. Would you not agree? Definitely the pulling point of this church, if it's open, which luckily for me it was today. So there we go. Fantastic. Let's have a quick look around this church as well. On the inside, it's not all about this fabulous tomb, is it? We've got some wall tablets above, which are only slightly readable from this distance. You'd probably read them better if you were stood in front of them. Some nice stained glass in the window over there, and some more tablets up above. Notice these bare walls, by the way. They're not plastered or anything, they're just basically stone walls, which gives it kind of an echoey feeling to it. Echoey sound, should I say. You're also walking here on some tablets in the floor. How about this? This is for John Ward, this one here. Died in 1846. And then this one in front of him here is Sarah, daughter of Joseph and Mary Haynes. There's some more in the nave floor as well, which I noticed as I walked in, but I was too busy trying to find the horse. There you go, a few more there. Quite a lot of them, actually. And look at the bricks in the floor. You don't see this very often, do you? Exposed brickwork in the floor of a church, in the floor of the nave. That's very rare. I've not seen that very often. I've seen it a couple of times, but it's not something that you, generally speaking, find everywhere. Otherwise, the walls are fairly bare in here. Not much stained glass in the nave, in the aisles, I should say. Organ to the left. Let's go to the back of the church and have a look at the font while we're here too. Look at these pews. How worn are these pews? Look at this. They've definitely seen some wear, haven't they? Wow, look at this. It's almost crumbling away there. This church has definitely seen a lot of people in its time. Let's go to the font and have a look at that too. Standard octagonal job. Quite nice. And obviously you've got the bell tower behind this with the bell ropes up there. Beautiful church. Well worth having a look around, if only for the massive sculpture over there of the horse and the guy on top of it. Wonderful, let's carry on. Now we've come south away from the church and we're outside the village hall. I thought this looked a little out of place, if I'm honest. It's clearly 1950s or later date-wise, and it's very different to the building next door. That said, it is Gadsby's only communal space, and it's well used. The phrase "use it or lose it" doesn't just apply to pubs after all. The building next door is Gadsby's School. The origins of this go back to 1841, when a dame's school was held inside the church. This would eventually evolve into a primary school, although it didn't get its own building until the 1860s. That's when this was built, thanks in no small part to the Cheney family. The schoolhouse was built on this, the Ashby Road, in 1861 and was commissioned by Colonel Cheney's son. Today, Gadsby Primary School caters for children aged 4 to 11, serving Gadsby, Ashby Folville, Barsby and South Crowson, which is over the border into Charnwood. Okay, I'm kind of glad it's a warm day today, because now I've got to use a footpath that crosses this field here, and it'll take us up to the northern end of Gadsby before we come back down again and end near the entrance to the hall. We've got a bit of plodding to do before we reach the end. As you can see, this field's quite big. This footpath crosses it, and then there's a junction kind of in this direction over here where we need to take another one that'll go up towards Pask Avenue. Now we have a long walk up to the top of the village, and this is a nice stroll through some countryside via the Leicestershire Round. It's a long distance footpath, and if you were to walk its entire length, you'd have to amble a total of 102 miles. The length is significant. Encircling Leicester, the idea for the path was devised by members of the Leicestershire Footpath Association to mark their centenary of their organisation in 1987. 100 miles marks 100 years. The countryside around Gadsby had some other uses rather than just being exclusively for sheep. Hunting was a popular thing around here. There are plenty of former hunting lodges which still exist across the landscape. Gadsby is also known well for its cross-country running race. It's called the Gadsby Gallop, and it's organised just before Christmas every year. Gadsby Village once had many springs around it, and there are still 2 water pumps on Chapel Lane. Water was very much a needed commodity in this place. What with the growth of the village thanks to the wool trade, water was vital for livestock, the sheep which produced the wool. We've made it to a small housing estate at the northern end of the village now. The name of this street is one of the only remaining clues to the history of Gaddesby Hall. This is Pask Avenue. Aside from the name of this road, it's also notable for another reason: this small playground. I've walked a long old way there along the Leicestershire Round footpath and then down Pask Avenue, and it's brought us back to the main street through Gadsby, and ideal time to make a little stop at this parish notice board and mark this off the Melton list. So we'll do that now. There we go. Gadsby has been visited by me. Now we've reached the corner of Chapel Lane and Cross Street, where a large boulder called the Bluestone marks an important spot. It's believed it was from this very spot that John Wesley once preached. As far as Methodism goes here, Gadsby no longer has a chapel. It was pulled down in 1966. At the bottom of Main Street now, we have the last landmark in Gadsby. That would be the Cheney Arms, the only pub in the village. It's named after the family, of course. There used to be two others in the village at one time, the Malt Shovel and the Gate, but those two are long gone. This originated not as a pub, but as a 3-storey Georgian house. It was built as a dower house for a widow who had lived with her husband at Gaddesby Hall before it was required by other family members. Here's the interesting bit though. Records show that the land this house stands on was once part of the manor of Ashby Folville and not Gadsby. It was only transferred to Gadsby in 1882. And right outside the pub there we have a bench which is in memory of Jean and Cliff Kane. Ideal place just to sit and watch the world go by at this junction where the Cheney Arms can be found. Now we are not done with Gadsby just yet. We're done with the village. We are not done with the parish yet. There are still 2 other villages within the boundaries of this one. One of them is called Barsby, which we'll check out at the end. The other one is Ashby Folville. Let's talk a bit about Ashby Folville before we even get to it. It's a former civil parish which was combined with Gadsby in the 1930s. Originally known simply as Ashby, it was recorded in the Domesday Book as consisting of 24 villages, 3 smallholders, 2 slaves, 1 priest, and it was all owned by Countess Judith. By the time of the Leicestershire survey of 1124, the manor had passed from Judith to her daughter Maud, the Countess of Huntingdon, and her husband King David I of Scotland. The Folvilles seem to have gained most of their estate at the beginning of the 12th century. Several of their possessions, such as Ashby and the manor at Tea in Rutland, were in the hands of other parties at the time of Doomsday, but had passed to the Folvilles by 1135. The family was certainly well established in Leicestershire by the mid-13th century. The Folvilles were rebels during both Barons' Wars. Sir William Folville had his land seized for his part in the First Barons' War in 1216, and Sir Eustace Folville was one of the knights appointed to enforce the provisions of Oxford in 1258. The manor of Ashby eventually passed via marriage from the Folvilles to the Woodfords and then the Smiths, and then via marriage to the Carringtons. Today, therefore, it's not uncommon to see the name Smith Carrington in places around Leicestershire. Okay, here we are then in Ashby Folville, very small village, a lot smaller than Gadsby is, but it still has quite a bit to talk about. There's a few landmarks that are also clustered together, and we're going to be starting proceedings with the Carrington Arms, which you can see right there. Now that has got quite a bit of history to tell us, and it'll be quite relevant to the rest of this walk around Ashby Folville. It should be pretty obvious now where the name of the Carrington Arms comes from. This pub has been a long-standing part of the village for years, serving as a gathering place for residents. It's a free house and has a history of serving a great range of beers, wines and spirits. Ashby Folville is also known well for its cricket club. Known more formally as Ashby Carrington Cricket Club, this has a history dating back to 1806 and has been based in Ashby Folville for over 50 years, having moved from Barsby in 1971. As a long-standing fixture in the village and surrounding area, the club is completely volunteer-run, with income generated from membership subscriptions, fundraising and donations. It runs 3 open-age teams and is in the process of setting up a junior section. The club's ground is called Park Field, which is located next to the pub. In early 2025, the club launched a crowd-funded appeal after the club sustained damage during the recent Leicestershire floods that devastated lots of villages across the county. Ashby Folville Village Hall is a registered charity. This has been a community hub in the village since at least 1965. It could well have once been used by the cricket club. A postcard from the 1930s hints at the village hall's use by the club back then, but it's not known for definite. So we haven't moved very far from our starting point, and already we've seen a couple of cracking buildings. Here's another one, Ashby Folville's church, which you can see right there, sort of shrouded behind a few trees and whatnot. Let's see if we can uncover the secrets of this one. As far as religious sites go in Ashby, the biggest and most important is St Mary's Church, a Grade 1 listed building. The church was founded in 1220 by Maud Bassett, who's buried in the chancel. The first patrons were Laund Priory, and the only remaining part of that early church is the Norman font. The church is mainly built of ironstone, though the chancel, tower and battlement frieze are made of grey ashlar. The north and south aisles were built in the 14th century, and the nave roof and tower were built in the following century. On the north wall there's an oil painting showing the lower part of the chancel screens, which now stand at the entrance to the belfry and the old pulpit. The belfry has 8 bells, the oldest dating back to 1637. 5 of the bells were recast in 1901. Several of the stained glass windows show they have some connection to the Smith-Carrington family. The belfry's west window commemorates the marriage of Herbert Smith-Carrington and Elizabeth Prince Stallard. It shows a Folville knight with Edward II and was erected in 1876 after an earlier one went missing. When the Ashby Folville estate was bought in 1890 by Herbert Smith-Carrington, he was the mayor of Worcester. He built cottages and a village institute in Ashby, but he also restored the church. At the centre of the Ashby estate is the magnificent Ashby Folville Manor. This is a late 19th century house built in a neo-Tudor style. It was substantially rebuilt between 1891 and 1893 by the architect John Ely of Manchester after a fire. The defining moment in the manor's history came just after World War II. It was used as a camp for displaced people from Poland, which was established in a former US Army base in the grounds. The resettlement camp was occupied from 1948 until 1965. From 2004 to 2016, it was the home of Rosemary Conley, the English businesswoman, author and broadcaster on exercise and health. Conley is best known for authoring a low-fat diet and exercise program called the Hip and Thigh Diet in 1988, which sold more than 2 million copies. However, her spot theory of fat reduction, which claims people can lose fat specifically from the hips and thighs, has no scientific basis. Okay, so to finish this episode off, we've come to what I think is the most interesting of the 3 villages in this parish. Gaddesby, to be fair to it, has got all sorts of things to talk about, and so has Ashby Folville. But this place has an interesting little story, I can tell you, and it's all to do with one particular building. Let's go and find it. Lastly, we have to take a look at Barsby, which is the smallest of the villages in Gaddesby Parish. This is essentially just a collection of houses. It has no facilities, no church, no pub, no shop, no anything really. That doesn't mean it's boring though, far from it actually. It lies on a crossroads and most of the houses are on either side of the main road between Ashby Folville and South Crowson. If you have the surname Barsby, the chances are you're related, distantly at least, to someone who once lived here. The surname derives from the village name, after all. The hamlet's name means farm or settlement of the barn or farm or settlement of the children or offspring. It's not totally clear. It was recorded in the Domesday Book as Barnesby and was formerly a chapelry in Ashby Folville parish before breaking away in 1866. It then became a civil parish in its own right before it was merged with Gaddesby in 1936. Barsby used to have a small Wesleyan chapel which was built in 1825. It had a small congregation. Indeed, some 20 people worshipped there in 1829. The congregation appears to have grown rapidly and so the chapel was enlarged in 1840 to provide 148 sittings. Okay, so we've walked from virtually one end of the village here to the other, and the camera was on there more than it was off, so you've pretty much seen everything in the place. This is the kind of village I would normally just drive through because it would be so much simpler. Don't usually do these on foot, but there is a reason why I'm on foot in this place, and that's because there's one building in particular which piqued my interest. You haven't seen it yet because it's hiding behind some trees. Now all of that is pretty normal for a hamlet like this, but Barsby has one other thing that we simply cannot leave out: Godsons Folly. A most unexpected delight, Godsons Folly is a house with a rather fancy pinnacled Gothic tower attached to it. It started life in the late 19th century as a village meeting place. It was quite the philanthropic endeavour by the local vicar. The vicar in question was Reverend John Godson, who looked after the church at Ashby Folville, but also had the care at Barsby. He held the living from 1869, and the 1871 census records him living at the vicarage in the village. Because Barsby had no church and villagers had to travel to Ashby Folville for services, the story goes that Godson intended the tower to be a mortuary chapel and the land around it was to be a burial ground. This made sense. The graveyard at St Mary's in Ashby was running out of space. Instead, it became a mission room with an attached tower. Nothing seems to survive to explain why Godson wanted an elaborate tower attached to the meeting room. Maybe he wanted it to appear like a church, or perhaps it was an observatory. Maybe it had some other practical purpose. The upper room was once used to build wireless sets, so presumably there was a good signal up there. The name of the architect is not recorded, although we do know that Godson had an interest in the subject as a member of the Leicestershire Architectural and Archaeological Society. He was also photographed with the architects F.W. Ordish and J.C. Traylon. They were responsible for a major restoration of Ashby Folville's church in 1874, but Ordish at least can be ruled out as the designer because he died before it was built. A local newspaper concluded that the appearance of Barsby was wonderfully improved by the tower, as it was a prominent eye-catcher down the village's main street. The first event it held was in January 1888, when villagers and visitors had a tea party followed by a sermon given by a missioner from Leeds. Alongside the programme of visiting preachers, Godson allowed local groups and families to use the hall. Birthdays were celebrated there. The Ashby Folville Church Choir held a social there in 1907, and later that same year, a lady called Miss Dalton gave a talk on her time as a lady missionary in the Yukon and the famous Klondike gold mines. Godson resigned the vicarate of Ashby Folville in 1910 after 40 years and died 2 years later in 1912. The tower was then adapted as a private house, and that's how it remains today. Great little building that. It took me absolutely ages to find it on the map because of course it's not marked. Although I did eventually work out where it was from an old photograph that I found on Barsby's village website, which it does have, by the way. Something that I found a little bit easier was the old chapel, which I mentioned in commentary just there. You probably clocked it yourself. It's here on the corner where Baggrave End meets the main road through the place. There it is. And from here, it's just a case of walking back along the main street and back to the car, and that is the parish of Gaddesby complete. And that will do us for the parish of Gaddesby, a very varied one it has to be said, and I really enjoyed the range of topics on offer here. As I said earlier, a lot of the parishes in Melton will be similar to this, so now you know what to expect across the next 22 episodes. I'll see you back here soon for more. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.